there were some statutes that are amended dealing with advanced ballot procedures and so on that conform to this Senate Bill 292. If you got questions, I'll try and answer them.
Any other questions about Senate Bill 292 to the reviser? Seeing none, thank you, Reviser Heim. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open up the people who are here to testify as proponents for Senate Bill 292, and the chair will now recognize Stephen Green.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? I think so. Thank you, Chairman Carpenter and members of the committee. My name is Steve Green, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to submit information pertaining to Senate Bill 292. The Opportunity Solutions Project is a nonprofit organization that advocates for state and federal policies that promote and advance free and fair elections. Joining me today via WebEx is Mr. Ryan Kriegshauser, partner with Kriegshauser and Nye Law. Previously, Mr. Kriegshauser served as Deputy Secretary of the State in Kansas and as a subject matter expert pertaining to election laws and practice in Kansas. He is on the testimony. He's going to sort of jointly provide why we think this bill specifically is important, and specifically some legal background that I think is pertinent to this discussion. So if it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Kriegshauser.
Okay, I do have him as listed as my second proponent, so I will go ahead and recognize Mr. Kriegshauser.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. As Mr. Green indicated, Kansas is in a somewhat interesting situation because of the Curay decision, and that's listed in my testimony as well. And basically what that decision came to find is it's a Kansas Supreme Court decision from 1998, and it's in the context of an election contest. And one of the things that was brought up during that contest was a number of ballots that assistance was given to individuals who had no disabilities. As you know, the law provides for affidavits of assistance for persons with disabilities, and nothing in Senate Bill 292 is intended to change any of that. But what Curay came to find was that assisting people who did not have disabilities was, while it might be a violation of the law, it was only a technicality. And the court found that there was no reason to throw out any of those ballots. And so what that brings into a situation here in Kansas is that basically any voter can assist any voter and be involved in the most intimate part of the voting process, i.e. the filling out of the ballot and marking of the ballot, and then also be involved in the transmittal of that ballot to the election office. So they know what's on the ballot, and then they themselves transmit that as a third party, not a member of the government, and they can do that without limit. And so they can do that with any number of people. Whereas I think the intent of the law prior to Curay was to at least limit that assistance to certain individuals. So that's kind of where we started. So as a public policy standpoint, you're left with a few paths on how to deal with this. I mean, do you try and limit who gets assistance? And I've been involved with election legislation for a while, and that gets very hard and difficult. And I'm sure folks at the DRC would agree with me on that, that's probably not the right way to go, but that's up to this committee, of course. So what we've done in Senate Bill 292 is instead just try and cap the number of ballots that a third party is able to take to the election office. That's all this bill is intended to do. It's not to change any of the provisions dealing with affidavit assistance. It's not trying to change any of those other provisions, but what it is trying to get at is this idea of ballot harvesting and allowing sophisticated, widespread operations, sometimes out of state, from coming in and collecting as third parties, sometimes paid, numerous ballots and taking those to the election office. And one example from 2008 was actually a Republican named McCrae Dowless and it was in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. And so this is not a partisan issue. This was in a Republican race, and he was basically indicted for mishandling a number of ballots. And it ended up, the candidate he was trying to help ended up withdrawing, even though he had no idea, allegedly, about this ballot harvesting scheme. And so I would submit to you that this is not a partisan issue. It's just an issue that's trying to keep third parties out of transmitting ballots on behalf of numerous individuals. And we tried to thread this needle with Senate Bill 292 by limiting it to 5. And what is the threshold for ballot harvesting? I think that's up to the committee. I mean, is that threshold 5? Is it 0? I would note that I think only 26 states allow for third parties to take ballots. And we aren't talking about mail ballots. These are non-government actors taking ballots. And I think only 26 states allow that. And many of those states have restrictions. They are part of the household or something like that. And this bill is much broader. It allows any individual to basically take another individual's ballot as long as they don't take more than 5 of them during an election cycle. And so this is trying to be a targeted approach to a very specific problem. And, you know, it's often asserted that this is a solution in search of a problem. But what we found from Senate testimony on the Senate side is apparently there are operations in Kansas that find this 5 ballot limit to be problematic. So there may be operations in Kansas that allow for third parties to take more than 5 ballots around, because there was quite a bit of pushback in the Senate testimony. And so it's up to this body to decide whether or not that's a public policy problem. But we submitted this legislation simply to prevent widespread ballot harvesting, and that is the intent, and that is the sole intent. And so with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, sir, for coming to committee today. Committee, are there any questions for the proponents? I have no more listed. I got a number of hands. First hand, well, the representative to my right asked to be recognized first, so Representative Miller, and then raise your hand so I can get you on the list if you would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Green, I didn't catch your organization.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Opportunity Solutions Project.
I'm not familiar with that group. What do they do?
So it's a nonprofit organization that's works across different states. Not sure exactly how many they're represented, but it's everything specifically in this case related to promoting free and fair elections. And so I know they're present in other states. I just don't have that exact list.
I don't care about other states. Do you have any evidence that elections in Kansas are not free and fair?
Sure. I might defer to Mr. Craig.
No, I want you to answer the question. You said you represent Opportunity Solutions Project, which is an organization dedicated to promoting free and fair elections.
Right.
Do you hold a position in that group?
Sure. Do you mean, when you say hold a position?
Are you chairman of the board, president?
So we represent.
Paid lobbyist?
Yep. So we represent Opportunity Solutions Project. And so I think the point that we're considering is that this bill, Senate Bill 292, is only going to strengthen or assure that the elections are free and fair.
And that is my question. Do you have any evidence that elections in Kansas are not free and fair?
Not with me today, no.
Okay. And for Mr. Kriegshauser, who I'm familiar with, we've met each other on a number of occasions. You mentioned that this is not a partisan issue. Are you aware of any Democrats that have committed crimes such as the Republican that you illustrated? Or is it merely Republicans that you know of that have been charged with crimes?
I don't have that information. I do know of that situation in North Carolina, and it's good to see you again, Representative.
So you're unaware of any members of any party other than Republicans that have created a problem?
At this point, I'd have to research that and look into that.
Now, you also made a statement that we weren't talking about mail ballots. If we're not talking about mail ballots, what are we talking about?
We're talking about ballots that are picked up by third parties and delivered to the election office by non-government third parties. So
And how did those ballots arrive to the voter other than via mail? That is
they
a mail
arrive,
ballot.
they arrive via the mail, and then they are completed by the voter, but then transported back to the election office via some other means by a third party. And so if they are delivered back by mail, there's no problem there.
Right. Are you aware of any problem of ballots being returned via a third person that didn't get there?
Well,
Because
I'm aware.
the people, if I may, the people I dealt with this last summer and fall found it to be a much more reliable source of return to entrust them with someone they trusted than to actually drop them in the mail because there were difficulties with mail.
Well, and again, I defer to this public policy body to determine whether or not that is more reliable. And we aren't saying that that can't occur. So in the one-off situation where there's a widow that knows no one to turn in her ballot and doesn't want to mail it for whatever reason, that individual can have a third party come and pick up that ballot and have it delivered to the election office. And that's not prohibited by this bill. What is prohibited is doing that in mass, having one individual collect more than 5 ballots. And where that threshold sits is really up to this public policy body. But right now, Senate Bill 292 sets it at 5 ballots.
And why should there be a threshold? If 6 of my constituents trust me to return their ballot and they request that I do it, why do I have to tell person number 6 that I can't?
Well, I think
understand that people, I do offer to the voters in my district to return their ballot, particularly this last year when many of them did not trust the mail. Many of them responded, and mind you, I didn't put any duress on them. I simply said I was available, and they could call if they chose to. They could deliver the ballot to the election office themselves, or they could have someone else do it. As it turns out, many people, believe it or not, trusted me to return their ballot, and they asked me to do that. But I'm trying to understand what the public policy is here if person number 6 calls and asks me to do the very thing I did for the first 5 people, why I should have to say, no, I can't do that. I'll just bring a volunteer with me and we'll substitute them for me. And when, in fact, that third person that we're talking about, they would trust less than having me do it myself.
All right, real quick, Representative, we'll have that be your last question, then we'll come back around to you after other members.
That is my last question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, if he could answer that.
Yes,
no,
proceed.
I appreciate the question because it is an interesting one. I think almost everyone on this committee would hopefully agree that at some point there is a problem with an individual collecting too many ballots. Is that 5,000? Should one individual who's not a government agent go collect 5,000 ballots, many of which ballots he or she may have been involved with knowing how those individuals voted? And so at some point, I think it becomes clear that there is a threshold by which there are too many ballots being collected by a single individual. And so the question is, what is that threshold? Is it 5? Is it 6? Is it 10? Is it 15? Again, that's a public policy consideration that this body has. What this bill is intended to do is to prevent widespread ballot harvesting. And those individuals that you discussed, I mean, there are other options by which they can get their ballot to the election office, including the mail. And whether or not people feel that that is reliable, I think differs. And that's a public policy discussion to be had by this committee, whether or not under Senate Bill 292, it's probably preferable for people to mail in their ballots so you don't have a third party individual go and collect all those ballots. But it is a public policy distinction that Senate Bill 292 does disincentivize one person collecting numerous ballots. And so that's that is a good point that you raise, and it's up to you to decide what that threshold is, sir.
All right. The next person is Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, if the ballot is mailed to the house, why do they need somebody to take it in? Why don't they just mail it back in? Why should somebody have to come by and pick it up?
Thank you, Mr. Yep, I'm going to defer to Mr. Kriegshauser on that. Sorry,
Sure.
Mr. Kriegshauser.
Well, I think that's what Representative Miller was talking about. I mean, there's different reasons why voters might want to do that, but there's also reasons why parties and organizations might want to pick up those ballots. The easy solution for many voters is to simply put a stamp on that ballot and send it back. And that is, if you do it a fairly long time away from the election, a number of days or a week or so, there is a high level of confidence that that ballot will be returned.
I think they're going to get their mail every day, so I see no problem there. Secondly, if you collected 5 ballots and there's a ballot box downtown where you drop those ballots into, how many times could you take 5? You know, does that question make sense?
Yeah, and I'm happy to take that one, Steve. Basically, for an election cycle, basically the voter has to affirm that they've delivered no more than 5 ballots.
They have to affirm that.
Yes.
Okay, so if they do it twice, they're breaking the law, which would be, it'd be tough to prove, but they're breaking the law.
Well, their name would show up on more than 5 ballots. So, I mean, there would be ways to verify that, but here, maybe I can share my screen here. This might help. I'll try and do this. Maybe if you all can see this. I'm trying to share it. So what you see here is this is actually a mail ballot envelope, but it is basically what this bill would change. So if you see up here, statement of the voter, section 1, they're declaring, basically they're a resident and qualified voter. And here the voter signs and puts their residential address. And then here, optional, it says, I hereby authorize the following person to mail or deliver my advance ballot to the county election office. And then if they name the authorized person, so the person that we've been talking about will have more than 5 ballot envelopes with their name on it. And then here they have to go over here and check this box and acknowledge that they've been designated to deliver the advance ballot envelope, and then they've not exercised any undue influence. And then down here is what we've talked about as the affidavit of assistance for a person with disabilities. And then they'd have to check this box over here. All Senate Bill 292 would essentially do is create a third box. And it would basically say, I affirm that I haven't delivered more than 5 ballots on behalf of other persons during this election cycle. And so, as you can see, it's not a deeply big change to the process that already exists, but the person delivering the ballot would be making that affirmation under penalty of perjury.
Okay, and then the last question. If I fill out my ballot and I seal it, and then they come by and get it, they're going to have to tear it open to sign it, then that's going to look phony. So it's just not a good situation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative, just real quick, they're not opening the ballot. It's on the outside of the ballot, Representative. So they're not going to be opening it. All right, the chair recognizes Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kriegshauser, I have a question that is akin to the one that my colleague, Representative Miller, asked. The North Carolina example is extremely well known. Can you point to any other example of widespread ballot harvesting that was illegal?
As far as actual prosecutions on it, I know there were a few reports out of Minnesota.
Reports?
Reports, yeah, news agencies it had individuals that testified, and there have been other reports. But yeah, North Carolina is the largest example of an actual prosecution.
My next question is basically a comment, sort of like, isn't this true? So I'll ask it that way. Is it not true that the ballot is inside a sealed envelope and the individual who is delivering it on behalf of the voter has to sign their name and basically make an affidavit and, at the risk of perjury?
Yes.
Okay. Then I would assume if we were going to put any kind of limit on it, 5, 10, 20, whatever, that there would have to be a process done by the election commissioner's office, or at least its election commissioner in Sedgwick County, that would be able to track how many a person, an assistee or assistant has delivered, and be able to tell when they've reached their limit, correct?
Not necessarily. I mean, most of these things, I think it's akin to a lot of tax law, where, let's face it, a lot of tax law is up to the taxpayer. I mean, when they file a return, a lot of that goes through the system, and it's only when audits occur that a lot of those things come to light. I think the same could be true here. I think in elections where the margin is very wide, while academically you could go through and determine how many voters actually collected and harvested. I think it would be more likely to come up in an election contest where these ballots will become important and analyzed very closely. And so it's in that context that it's most likely to come forward. But the information would be there if an election official wanted to pursue some kind of system, but it's not required by Senate Bill 292.
So as general, if Mr. Chairman, I think I have one more question, if I might. I realize I'm
If you can make it
stretching.
quick.
Thank you. Generally within GOTV, what happens is the candidate receives, or the candidate's organization receives a list of outstanding advance ballots. Phone calls are made. I one time received an advance ballot and deliberately delayed filling it out to see how many phone calls I got. I got one a day for 5 days in a row saying, have you filled out your advance ballot yet? Can we help you? Please turn it in. And occasionally, as those calls are made, someone says, well, I need somebody to take it downtown for me. Because there is an issue. First of all, it gets to be more of an issue as you get closer to the election. And secondly, there was an issue with mail service in the Wichita area and a lot more news about national problems. So that was definitely an issue, and assisting someone by simply signing the envelope and then delivering it to the bin outside the election commissioner's office, or actually going into the election commissioner's office and turning it in, is done. And it's done by volunteers, and it's routine. It is a non-problem. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The previous representative's first question, I think, gets at the nugget of why I think this bill is needed. She asked, if you knew of any instances of illegal ballot harvesting, and the problem is that it's not illegal. You know, if somebody from out of state mails, you know, tons of ballot requests and then goes to every house that actually requested a ballot, helps them fill out the ballot, and turns it in for them. Mr. Kriegshauser, do you think that that is in the spirit of a free and fair election?
Well, I think the representative's first point is a good one. In Kansas, ballot harvesting is not illegal. And so we wouldn't have situations of illegal ballot harvesting here. But I think the intent of Senate Bill 292 is to remove as many walls, if you will, between the voter and the election office. The more moving parts that are in that process, the more chances that something could happen to that ballot, or some kind of malfeasance could occur. And so the intent behind Senate Bill 292 is to eliminate non-government third-party folks who go and collect numerous ballots. And for the previous example, as you get closer to an election, as I mentioned before, Senate Bill 292 allows for third parties to come pick up ballots, just not on a massive scale. And so we're really trying to thread the needle, allowing for certain situations to continue, but still limit the possible damage that could occur.
All right, Representative, you have any follow-up? Are you good? All right, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, ballot harvesting, as you define it, was legal in North Carolina under the situation you described. What was illegal was the improper delivery of the ballot. That gentleman did a number of things that were felony offenses. If our law only allowed you to do one, it's still possible, if you want to break the law and suffer prosecution, possible felony prosecution, you still could. It's not the number, it's the way you handle the ballot that becomes illegal. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I think that that's correct in many ways, and it's just difficult to, as I say, thread the needle and find out what the best public policy ways to limit the damage. If you have a bad actor, someone who's willing to lie, then yeah, it's difficult to first find and to prosecute those people. But what you can do is limit the potential fallout.
Well, if I could, let's say we put a limit and they're a bad actor, they're not going to sign the ballots to say they did more than 5. They're just going to be a bad actor anyway. They're going to pick them up and drop them in a box. Nobody's going to know that they're the ones that did it. If that's what they're into, if they want to break the law at the risk of committing felonies, it's easy. It's easy for them to get around this new requirement. The people that are acting legally will be the ones that suffer from it. Is that not correct?
Well,
if they don't sign that envelope that's currently required that they sign, then how are you going to know that it was them?
No, I would agree with you that if there are bad actors, it's very difficult to stop those bad actors. But that doesn't mean that there isn't some attempted enforcement mechanism to shape public policy, regardless. I mean, bad actors exist in any part of life, and that doesn't mean we don't have laws to still structure behavior.
Right. And just as I said earlier today, we shouldn't do that at the expense of people who are not bad actors. Bad actors are the ones that cause problems for the people who are good actors. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Actually, we're imagining bad actors in this scenario because you can't point to a single instance in Kansas where we've had such a bad actor, correct?
Well, I think what I can point to and what has become apparent from this hearing and the Senate hearing is that there are organizations and operations that do go out and collect more than 5 ballots, and they collect numerous ballots. And it's up to this public policy body to decide whether or not that's a good or a bad thing. This legislation attempts to limit that.
Yes, and who are those organizations in Kansas?
You'll have to ask
you just identified. You just made the statement of fact that there are such organizations. I want you to back up your statement of fact with facts. Who are they? Name at least one.
You'll have to ask the conferees and the people who provided that information in public hearings, sir.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Mr. Kriegshauser, you're the one who just now made the statement of fact. I'm not talking about any testimony in another hearing. You just made the allegation. Now support your allegation with evidence.
Sir, what I would say is that through the testimony in front of the Senate committee and here, we have heard people say that they go through and that this is a problem because it involves more than 5 ballots. I mean, Davis Hammett in the Senate side, he said that there are numerous ballots that are returned, many of them with assistance, and that this legislation created a problem. And so you'd have to ask those conferees and those members of the committees that have said that they go collect more than 5 ballots. I don't know who they are. Those assertions are made by other folks.
All right, so
One last question, if
all
I
right,
may.
just remember, Representative, these are conferees, so please be respectful of them when asking your questions. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And I certainly do not intend to be disrespectful, and if it comes across that way, I apologize. Adamant is not disrespectful. It's adamant. Sir, isn't it true that the biggest reason this last year people did not trust putting their ballots in the mail is because the president told them not to? President Trump, do you recall President Trump numerous times telling people that they should not vote by mail?
I don't personally recall that, but it very well could have happened. And I can't speak to what made people distrust the mail. I know I get frustrated when it takes 10, 15 days to get something in the mail.
And I thank you for that comment on the record. I will recall that comment because it's exactly what we're talking about here. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your testimony.
Representative Topiker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I kind of don't think that this bill goes far enough. I said it before in this committee that I don't think any candidate should be going to anyone's house and helping them fill out a ballot that has their name on it. I just, you know, when you look at the current law, we have at least one statute that I can find in current law that talks about, you know, staying 3 feet away from any voting booth, that people are not allowed in the precinct to be closer than 3 feet from a machine or a table being used by for election purposes. We have that law in the books. That is KSA 25-2413.
Representative, do you have a question for the conferees?
Yes, I do have a question. And this, I'll get to that in just a second, Mr. Chairman. Also, we have Kansas Administrative Regulation 7-45-2, which talks about poll agents, and it says that poll agents are not allowed to touch or handle any voter's ballot during the voting process. And so there's a statute, there's a Kansas Administrative Regulation 7-45-2, and the statute is 25-2413. So, Mr. Kriegshauser, I'm wondering, why are we even allowing the candidate in this proposed legislation that you're offering? Why are we even allowing them to? I mean, why do we even now in current law allow a candidate to touch someone's ballot? That's the question.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a good one. As I mentioned, I think there's 24 other states that do not allow this. They do not allow third parties to touch and handle and deliver ballots on behalf of other voters. So it's at least 24 states have the public policy that you're stating, that voters should not, or folks should not be able to take other people's ballots to the polls.
All right, committee, we are going to go ahead and move on. We're going to run out of time before we can address all the items that we have in front of us today. So thank you to the folks who came and provided comments regarding Senate Bill 292 as supporters. We are going to go ahead and move to the opponents of 292 now and hear what their remarks about this bill are. The chair will now recognize Caleb Smith. Is Caleb Smith online?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. My name is Caleb Smith. I'm a campaign director for Kansas Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. Thank you for the opportunity to submit remarks to this committee today. I'll keep this as brief as possible. I see we're running a little bit low on time, and I don't want to waste your time by reading the entirety of my written remarks. But I just wanted to take a few minutes to sort of go over the main issues that Kansas Appleseed sees with Senate Bill 292 and just the reasons why we oppose Senate Bill 292. Essentially, we oppose Senate Bill 292 because it makes it harder to vote, specifically for the disabled, the elderly, and non-white communities. The communities who are the most likely to rely on help turning in their advance ballots from caretakers, and they're also just the communities that historically face the greatest barriers to the ballot box. These are communities that we need to remove barriers to voting from, and not arbitrarily creating new ones with government overreach. By targeting caretakers, faith communities, and faith leaders, and just everyday Kansans trying to be good neighbors, this bill will only serve to make it harder for communities to exercise their rights at the ballot box, while failing to address any known widespread issues with voting in Kansas. For all these reasons and others, Kansas Appleseed opposes passage of Senate Bill 292. Thank you for your time, and I can stand for questions if necessary.
Thank you for your remarks. The chair now recognizes Mike Burgess.
Oops, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here again today. I'm Mike Burgess with the Disability Rights Center of Kansas, and appreciate the opportunity to come and talk elections and disability rights with elections anytime and every time that's available. So this is, I think, largely similar, our testimony is largely similar to a bill we had before on a House bill, and our reasons for opposing are the same, largely. One thing I do want to go into is I think the representative pointed out the poll agents, the regulations and statutes regarding poll agents, and that's different than somebody who is assisting someone in voting, because the law does allow an individual with a disability to have anyone they want come and assist them either on site or to vote in, if they're voting by mail, and that's perfectly within the rights. Now that election, there are rules around that. That assistant is not allowed to exert undue influence on that individual. They can't tell them how to vote. They can't share how that individual voted with anyone else. And so there are very strict requirements, and that person can only help if they're invited to help. And so when you show up at a polling site, if an individual wants assistance, they can ask, if they ask election board workers to help, it has to be individuals of each party or of two different parties when you're on site. And in a previous life, I had served on this committee previously and had the opportunity to chair it. I've worked as an election board worker, and then now I've been at the Disability Rights Center for 6 years. So I've kind of worn several different hats around this space. And so that's, as previously we had testified, we receive the PAVA grant that was part of the Help America Vote Act. And so part of that is we educate people with disabilities what their rights and responsibilities are with voting. And so we're very clear when we educate the individuals with disabilities what their rights and responsibilities are, that those are the rules. So that way they can be clear and be aware if somebody is trying to do something inappropriate. And that's really important. But it's really important also to let them have that opportunity to vote, because while, again, comments were made about, well, it's easy to just get a stamp and drop it in the mail and it's no big deal. If you're an individual with quadriplegia, that is a big deal. And so we're going to oppose any effort that makes it harder for that individual to vote. And you have individuals, again, who may not have friends and family, due to a variety of circumstances. They may live in a group setting. So we're going to be opposed to anything that's going to make it harder for that individual to have that right to vote. And so we talked about being opposed to if you do, household within a household limit. There are folks that would exclude. When you limit it at a number, again, if a lot of folks are on the home and community-based services waivers. If they have a paid attendant who comes in to help them with their activities of daily living, which include, and again, if they're an individual with quadriplegia, they'll have somebody who comes in and helps them transfer from bed, helps them to toilet, helps them to get dressed, makes them breakfast. That person may do that for a number of people. That may be the only individual that person sees in a week. And so if they're the sixth person, you're going to say, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you because I've already returned 5 ballots. You're erecting a barrier for that individual. So with that, Mr. I know I want to be respectful of time, but I would be happy to stand for questions. And I think hopefully that helps you to understand kind of the differences and why, this will have a disproportionate impact on individuals with disabilities and why we stand opposed to that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess, for your remarks. The chair now recognizes Davis Hammond.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, proceed.
All right. Chair Carpenter, members of the committee, I think we've discussed many proposals that are similar to this. So I just want to highlight some of the past concerns. Again, with all these bills, the biggest question is there a clearly defined problem? And is there a carefully crafted solution to that problem? And I would argue there's really neither here. No problem has been identified in this state. There's accusations of things that happen in other states that have extremely different election laws than us. Also, the proponent talked about the Cure decision in 1998. So many election laws have been passed in Kansas since then, including in 2007, 25-2433, which is what explicitly says that it is a crime if you obstruct the delivery of a mail ballot. It is a crime if you take into possession that mail ballot and then do not deliver it. So you have to properly deliver the ballot. It's a crime to exercise undue influence on someone during that process, and it's a crime to open the ballot. So any of the kind of nefarious stuff we're worried about is already a crime in Kansas law. All this will do is say if someone has assisted more than 5 people with returning a ballot, this magic made-up 5 number, above that, they become a felon criminal who could go to jail and who will lose their right to vote. In the Senate hearing, which I was a part of, there was even discussion about what happens to that 6th person, not the person assisting the voter who has been assisted. And the proponents admitted it would be a legal concern that might require litigation. So you might be actually disenfranchising people who are completely outside of this discussion by the impact, because what happens to that 6th voter who was assisted, who has no reason to believe that their ballot would be challenged in this process. The other thing about who this impacts, I think there's this narrative that there's, this giant third-party monster kind of collecting these ballots. The testimony that was submitted in writing on the Senate side, one of these third parties that's assisting people is a Catholic nun covenant in Concordia, Kansas, where they have essentially ballot leads who make sure the other elder nuns are able to get their ballots in. So you actually have them going on the floor and collecting the ballots, and y'all would be passing a law that will arrest Catholic nuns for assisting their fellow sisters in returning their ballots. There's also common practice that we learned about from the NAACP about where some churches will have a ballot day where everyone brings in their ballot and then they bring them down the aisle to celebrate. Again, y'all would be arresting these clergy and charging them with felony crimes for this. And also election officials, including the outgoing Johnson County Elections Commissioner, Connie Schmidt, offered testimony. She's been involved in election administration for decades about the enforcement concerns about this, the burden that y'all are putting on election officials to try to track and deal with the enforcement mechanism of this. So, I mean, honestly, the biggest concern about all this is those unintended consequences. Until this discussion started, until about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I didn't even imagine the situation that this bill would be criminalizing nuns who are helping their fellow nuns turn in ballots. There are so many unique circumstances where Kansans who have been able to assist their fellow Kansans in returning ballots, they've been able to do this for decades. Some of this is habit to them, and now it would newly become a crime, and that's extremely concerning. So with that, again, I think there's so much more to be discussed before something like this would pass, but I'm happy to stand for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Hammond, for your remarks. The chair now recognizes Kendall Seal.
There we go. All right. Kendall Seal, ACLU of Kansas. Thank you for having us today. We're opposed to SB 292. Admittedly, earlier this year, we heard from the Secretary of State who shared with this committee that his goal was to give voters of Kansas a good experience. And we share that goal. We want voters to have a good experience. And secondarily, he said there was no widespread fraud. And for that reason, we're really curious about why Senate Bill 292 would be brought up. Notably different from House Bill 2054 was the adjustment on who delivers the ballot, and we think that's a step in the right direction. However, the numbers, the limits remain. That's already been discussed. Overarching issue here is that you're creating felons out of neighbors helping neighbors. And to our viewpoint, the proposed punishment in this case in no way aligns with an actual widespread problem, as evidenced by the Secretary of State's testimony. So for those reasons, the ACLU is opposed to this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Seal, for your remarks. Okay, committee, so we have about 30 minutes left here. I am going to open it up for questions of the people who oppose Senate Bill 292. I would ask that you keep your questions brief, pithy, and to the point, if you could, and then we will move forward from there. So are there any questions for these individuals? Representative Miller.
I have a pithy question for Kendall Seal. Is the ACLU a chapter of Americans for Prosperity or vice versa? Thank you.
The mic was not on, but the answer was that they are not, for anybody who's listening online later. Are there any other questions for the opponents? Representative Berquist.
Yes, I have a question for Mike. If you could come to the microphone, please. Your organization is advocate for giving disabled people more abilities and expanding their understanding of their rights within our society, correct?
Yes.
And one of the things you probably have to deal with is people that do things with good intentions, apparently, but not really. People that will abuse somebody that's disabled. My question to you is, if somebody comes to a facility that has 10, 15 people with disabilities that aren't able to fill out their own ballots, do you have any concern about their being pressured by maybe a candidate to go around to those people and help them to make sure and write their name in on the ballot?
Well, it's every individual's right to ask for assistance and ask who they would like to have assistance from. And so if there is, one of the things we're very interested in is any instance of abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So that goes into very much a broader sense. If they're exerting undue influence, yeah, we would be very interested in that as well. We have election hotlines and that's one of the things that we encourage people to call us about if there are, accessibility issues or any sort of a rights violation. So that does cut both ways for sure. If it happens the other way, we would definitely like to know, and we will do what we can. We are unable to, we don't get involved in criminal prosecution in any way, but we are there to advocate for individuals when it comes to their rights.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Representative Topliker.
Yes, question for Mike. Did you think about or talk about stamps, postage stamps?
In terms of
people that you assist in getting their ballot to the election office or getting it mailed in, getting it sent in?
So a lot of what we do is educating voters we do a lot of outreaches prior to Election Day. We do some monitoring of polling places. It is not one of our primary functions that we go out and assist voters individually with anything.
Do you think that it might be a good idea for a candidate who wanted to assist a voter, and do you think it might be a good idea for that candidate to just give the voter a stamp? That's illegal. To give someone a stamp. Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got a question for Mr. Seal, if I could. So if I go to a polling place on Election Day with my campaign shirt on, you know, Pat Proctor for state representative, the law considers that undue influence in electioneering, and I get in trouble for that. Why is it not undue influence if I go to somebody's house when I know they've got a ballot there and watch them or assist them in filling out a ballot with that same shirt on?
I think it would depend on the underlying facts that you present, and those particular facts, if you're campaigning at an election site versus if you're watching someone how they vote. I think those are, facts that would lead to different outcomes in terms of someone felt duress based off your presence or not.
Currently in statute, it is not in any way illegal if a person asks for assistance for me to sit there in their living room and fill out their ballot for them per what they're asking me to fill it out. Is that true?
So as candidate.
Yeah, as a candidate.
Yeah, so you can assist delivery of the ballot to the mailbox.
I assist them in the filling out if they're disabled and they request the help.
You can.
Thank you.
I did, yes.
Any further questions for the opponents? Seeing none at this time, thank you everybody who came in and spoke on Senate Bill 92. All right, we are going to go ahead and move on. I am going to limit the testimony from this point forward on the other bills so that we can try to get as many in as possible. We are going to go ahead and move to Senate Bill 293 next. Could the reviser please brief us on what Senate Bill 293 is?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this is a brief or short bill. It's titled Transparency in Revenues Underwriting Elections Act. And the guts of the bill are subsection C, no election official shall knowingly accept or expend any money or any other thing of value directly or indirectly from any person except as provided in acts of appropriation or otherwise provided by law for any expenditures relating to conducting, funding, or otherwise facilitating the administration of an election pursuant to law. I believe the source of this, or at least one of the reasons, was that the founder of Facebook spent $350 million in grant money for election officials. And I think there was 20 counties in Kansas that got some of that money. Might point out that gifts are not considered or are not required to be budgeted by a public agency in the state of Kansas. So if you have any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Committee, are there questions for the reviser at this time? Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please repeat your last point? I'm sorry, but I was unable to hear.
Sure. The Kansas budget law that applies to counties and would apply to election officials does not require that gifts be budgeted as part of the annual budget that local governments adopt.
Thank you. I have another question along the same lines. That I would assume would not apply to a county commission that decided to expend an amount, for instance, to send out advance ballots or to assist with the election office, perhaps over and above what's been budgeted within the county budget or the election commissioner budget.
The budget law basically requires that the monies be appropriated as part of the budget, and that whatever amount is appropriated could not be exceeded without a budget amendment. So I'm not real clear if I understood your question or not.
That's the answer, Mike. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any further questions for the reviser at this time? Seeing none, the chair will open up the Informational hearing on Senate Bill 293. For the proponent, we have Stephen Green. Mr. Green, your testimony will be limited to 2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm coming from Nebraska, and so it was always 3 minutes for testimony, so I hope I can do that. And so I want to thank you for the opportunity for providing information regarding our position on Senate Bill 293. Just in full disclosure, we were proponents last week in Senate Fed and State. Senate Bill 293 would prohibit third-party entities from funding elections. For background, and it was mentioned by the revisor that Mark and Shan Zuckerberg Foundation invested about approximately $350 to $400 million in elections via grants around the country. In some circumstances, and it's referenced in the footnotes of the testimony, they came with strings attached to them. And obviously, I've done a little work in state work, and grants often have stipulations. If you're going to receive the money, it's just not, here's $500,000, here are the stipulations if you're going to receive the grant. Specifically in Wisconsin, they were assigned, or they required mentors to be involved in the election administration process and given unprecedented access to the process. And I'm just going to point out, for the sake of time, one of the most important aspects of our elections process is the idea that people have to have faith in the results and they have to trust the process. I think anything that requires strings attached to grants in local elections can obviously create an era of undermining that process. And so that was our position. We think that if you get a chance, opportunity to consider this bill, you should. And with that, I'll close for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Committee, okay, this is the only proponent I have. Committee, are there any questions for the proponent of Senate Bill 293? Representative Miller, it looks like you're raising your hand.
Yeah. First of all, the rule is conferees get 2 minutes unless they're from Nebraska, in which they get 1.
From Topeka originally, if that counts for anything.
Sir, this is totally new to me. Whatever articles you can forward to me via email, I would appreciate reading them. But I want to go back to something Representative Toplicker mentioned earlier, or referenced, and that was paying for postage. Would this bill, if you had a benefactor, well, first of all, in Shawnee County, we pay postage on advance ballots due to the smart thinking of a young county commissioner decades ago. But in counties that don't do that, the voter has to pay for postage. If a benefactor wanted to donate to the county enough money that they could provide postage paid return on their advance ballots, would this bill prohibit that?
So I believe the answer would be yes. So the intent is that if you're a third-party entity, that you cannot provide grants or funding outside of the normal allocation for elections in the county.
And what, if I may, is the evil to the scenario I just described? If a benefactor wanted to cover the postage for voters of all types, shapes, and sizes, where is the evil if there's no strings connected?
So I look forward to being able to send you those specific examples, because I think that will highlight some of the concerns that you're.
Thank you. That's good enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir.
Are there further questions? Yeah, so if you could send that to the committee assistant, we'll have the committee assistant send that out to the entire committee. Seeing no other further questions at this time, thank you, sir. Representative Bishop. Quickly.
If a researcher wanted, for instance, to provide the funding for an audit to be done of an election, maybe in a particular county or a collection of counties as a research project to perhaps investigate a new method of auditing, would that not be allowed?
I think that would be a different provision, and this would just be pertaining to allocation of funds specific to elections or in county elections.
So if the election is over with, then, okay.
All right, thank you, sir. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You said $350 million from, what kind of stipulations are you talking about?
So there was, so again, I look forward to sending the article. I think that's going to be helpful in highlighting and articulating the sort of stipulations. One specific example out of Wisconsin was that it required a mentor. So a third party was able to provide a grant in which it required them having an election mentor, specifically in the city of Green Bay. And so you had a situation in which a person that was not a part of the county election office having certain access to the process through this third-party grant that creates a distrust or a concern that in some way there's an outside influence that shouldn't normally be in that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. All right, thank you so much. And I just want, for the note of the committee, Sedgwick County was a recipient of some of those funds. I think about $700,000 or $800,000, if I recall correctly. So 20 counties, something like that, got funds from this proposal. All right, next I have, as a neutral, Katie Kapal with the Secretary of State's office.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Katie Kopal, Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. We understand the intent of 293 and we are neutral on the bill. However, we would like to see the scope of the bill narrowed. Our primary concern is that the bill currently prohibits the acceptance of anything of value, and that would include things like donations of food to poll workers, which commonly happens, particularly in our smaller towns on election day. We often, communities will get in-kind contributions of facilities to be used as polling locations. One thing we experienced in 2020 was a donation of PPE or hand sanitizer. So one idea we would like to raise for consideration, respecting that you are the policymakers, is to consider capping the value at maybe $15,000 or $20,000. We feel that's high enough for the in-kind contribution of your larger event facilities. I'm thinking Interest Bank Arena in Wichita or the Stormont Events Center here in Topeka. In the event they were available to be used as polling locations, but that monetary cap would also be low enough to prevent substantial undue third-party influence. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Kapal. Are there any questions for the Secretary of State's office at this time? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony or remarks. Next, I have one listed opponent, who is Davis Hammett.
All right. Chair Carpenter, members of the committee, I'm glad to see the Secretary of State giving testimony, their office. This round, they weren't there in the Senate, and this is one of the concerns that I had raised on how broadly written this bill is. It appears to outlaw accepting even volunteers. It's a common thing to have volunteer poll workers who choose to either receive funds or to do it as a volunteer, have volunteer or donated polling spaces, which happen for some of the big arenas. And then also it's written so broadly that it says that election officials, the election administration, can't accept anything of value, even if it's indirectly related to elections, which seems to even apply that essentially if another county office got a grant and that grant helps pay for a facility that the election office is also housed in, that would be a crime. And I believe this bill actually makes it a felony. It turns the election official into a felon if they are involved in accepting this volunteer work or these donations. So also the proponents, everything they said, it's important to note, is allegations. None of this has been verified. These are allegations of things that have happened in other states. Right now, there is a legislative post audit underway in the Kansas legislature about this exact topic. So I would urge restraint until that post audit is complete, so y'all can see if there is even a problem. And again, if there is a problem, it can be carefully crafted. A solution can be carefully crafted to address that problem without being unintentionally broad and creating problems. The other thing to consider is that across many parts of government, there are grants accepted. Your public parks get grants, the libraries get grants. And so as this body continues to pass unfunded mandates on election offices, you should be careful about restraining their funds. Thanks.
Committee, are there any questions for the opponent on this legislation? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Hammett, for your remarks. Okay, we're going to move on to the next informational hearing on Senate Bill 94. On Senate Bill 94, the chair will recognize neutral. We don't have any proponents listed. Are there any proponents who wish to provide remarks? Seeing none, the chair will now recognize neutral remarks from Katie Kapal at the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Katie Kopal with the Secretary of State's office, and I would remind everyone in the room, I speak on behalf of the office, and although other individuals might like to quote us, I am the official representative for the office. Just felt that that was necessary to remind folks of. We are neutral on Senate Bill 94. We would like to just raise a few issues and that we believe either contradict with existing law, or we would just like to have greater clarification with legislative intent. One section relating equipment in Senate Bill 94 appears to ban every type of voting equipment other than a ballot marking device. But this conflicts with another section, A1A, which allows voting systems that may produce a voter verifiable paper ballot. There are currently systems on the market that are more than just a ballot marking device, which also produce a voter verifiable paper audit trail. The bill would only allow one type of machine that's currently available in today's marketplace, which limits the ability of counties to purchase. I also want to point out that Section 3B3 appears to allow voters to voluntarily waive their right to a secret ballot, and it's just long-standing practice in Kansas that election officials should never be able to identify a voter's ballot or their vote on that ballot once it has been submitted to a ballot box. The second, and my colleague Clay is here and he can talk more about the audits if the committee wishes to dive into it, but the audit provisions proposed in Senate Bill 94 are inconsistent
30 seconds.
with current audit provisions. We need better clarification on a sample hand-counted audit of paper ballot casts, and we would just like that clarification so that rules and regulations coincide with legislative intent. And then finally, we also request clarification on the term handwritten signature when it's discussing the signature requirement. Again, we just want to make sure that we are aware of what legislative intent is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kapal. That is the only neutral I have for this bill. Representative Miller.
Question for the chair, Ms. Kupal, or the reviser, whoever can answer it. I see this was introduced by the Senate Fed State Committee. Do we know who requested that they introduce it?
I believe this was Senator Hildebrand. That is my best stab at it, but
I don't want to.
I will refer to the reviser.
It was Senator Hildebrand who requested the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any other questions for the neutrals? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Kapal. The chair will now recognize Davis Hammett as an opponent.
Chair Carpenter, members of the committee, right now we are in a phase-in period to require all new machines to have voter verified paper trails. That's something I've been involved in working on for about 5 or 6 years for the legislature to pass it. The reason it's not immediately mandated is because these machines are incredibly expensive. There's a couple counties that haven't upgraded yet, and this would force them to immediately upgrade. Kind of ironically, this is something that maybe a private grant could help them do that y'all are discussing banning. The biggest concern about this, though, is it institutes these margin of error audits, which means that they are statistical sample audits, meaning that instead of telling you if the results were accurate, it would mean that every precinct has a percentage of likelihood that the results are accurate. That would cause, I think, massive voter confusion. And when y'all talk about distrust in the process, if you started hearing that they are 85% sure that your election result was right in this precinct, that would be a disaster. I don't think that was the intention of the bill. I think that election audits are a complex topic that deserve a lot of consideration, and this was just rapidly put together. So I just recommend the committee tread carefully, especially regarding this idea of sampling audits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hammett. The chair now recognizes Mike Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and all, in the effort to be as brief as possible, you hopefully have my written testimony as well. This is largely similar to a bill that the senator had introduced last year that we testified on the Senate side on. And so current election law allows for an individual with quadriplegia. I mean, there's a variety of signature requirements or options that an individual has. It could be a mark. In the case of someone with quadriplegia, it could be a wink. And so you have to have, and that's why the existing law has a provision where if they give their signature, you have others who can attest that that signature was given. And so that's all in statute in other places. So on page 2, line 20, where it prohibits poll books without a handwritten signature, this would apparently conflict with federal law. And so we would be happy to work to fix that. I made that offer last year as well. And then other discussion items that are related to that with the types of equipment. To actually have fully accessible, the best practice wouldn't just be the ballot marking device, because somebody who is blind to be able to vote without assistance, they can't. The issue is that transporting of the ballot and feeding it into the ballot counter. And so there are machines that allow for completely unassisted voting, and that's, as the Secretary of State or previous conferee said, some of those machines exist in counties today that have that capability. Typically, like here in Shawnee County, they just print them and then you go and transport it to a ballot marking device. The best practice nationally is where you can have that fully accessible where a voter can vote without assistance. And the machines, the technology is there. And so we would encourage you to tread lightly, to not, to allow technology to help fill this void, because the goal would be to allow voters to vote without assistance and to ensure that privacy. Because again, it is their right, it's their vote, and to allow the technology to allow them to vote without assistance. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, sir. Minute 57. Good job. All right, so we will have questions now for the opponents of the bill. The chair recognizes Representative Miller.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to back up to the neutral with the official spokesperson of the Secretary of State's office. I'm looking at.
We will hold that until the folks.
Thank you.
We have some other comments. Representative Proctor.
Mr. Chair, I actually, one of the opponents raised an issue that I would like to address to the Secretary of State as well, so I can stand by on that.
All right, we will wait for that. Representative Lee Hahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick question, and I feel a little bit silly asking, but this is for Mr. Hammett, I believe. Could you tell me again which group you work for and a little bit about your background? You testify as a witness a lot, and I just want to make sure that I characterize you into the correct category. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative. Here I'm on behalf of an organization called Loud Light Civic Action, so focused on voting rights and access to civic participation in Kansas. However, I've been just civically engaged and involved in the state legislature, both in this official capacity, but before in just a personal capacity. I used to become before elections committees for the last 5 or so years, just as an engaged citizen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Are there any further questions for the opponents at this time? Seeing none, we will shift gears back to the neutrals. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Kupal, looking at the fiscal note, it appears that they're quoting the Secretary of State's office when they estimate that the cost for less than 10 counties would be anything from $20,000 to $300,000 per county. Could you get us a list of the counties and the estimated cost of those 10 counties, please?
Representative Miller, this is Brian Caskey. We have additional information now.
Are you the official spokesman of the Secretary of State's office? I want to hear from the official spokesperson.
His comments will be permitted, Representative.
Thank you.
We have additional information. We've been continually surveying the counties after the 2020 election. And at this point, we know of one county that is in the middle of the procurement process and acquiring equipment that does have a voter verifiable paper audit trail. I do not have the exact number, but it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every other county that we've heard from has stated that they've already completed the purchase.
All right, and just for my own curiosity's sake, because I did ask this question the other day to Ms. Kapal, all the counties with their machines. We only have one right now that's not necessarily up to speed just yet. But are all the machines in the other 104 counties the verified paper trail type machines?
Yes, the ones that we have heard from, yes. There is only one that does not, and they are in the process of procuring equipment to have the verified paper trail.
Fantastic. Thank you, Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hammett raised a question, or raised an issue with this bill that I'd like to address to you, Ms. Capal. He said that doing verification by sampling would undermine faith and confidence in the election. Don't you currently do a sample precinct from every district when you guys review the elections to make sure that they're being done well?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to defer to my colleague Clay Barker, who has done a lot of research on audits and can provide a better summary of the audit in Kansas.
Mr. Chair, Representative Proctor, what Kansas does is we do a 100% audit of particular precincts that are picked at random, but that's checking everything and comparing it to the results. The sample audit is you take a particular district and you may only pick 100, 200 ballots at random from that district, and that gives you a margin of confidence that your result is correct before it's certified. And less in some other states is this method can be incredibly confusing to voters and actually undermine confidence in the system, because what they're hearing is you're checking the entire outcome of an election by only looking at 162 ballots. That doesn't make sense to us. It's mathematically verifiable, but it can be counterintuitive unless you understand why the number of ballots were picked and where they were picked.
If I understand time's short, but if I could follow up, aren't you verifying an election by only checking one precinct in a whole district? I mean, how, I guess I don't understand the difference.
All right, well, we're doing a traditional post-election ballot audit where we know how many, what the vote total is in a particular precinct, and then we're comparing that to all the paper ballots, and that verifies the entire system. So if it's 101 votes for candidate A and 101 paper ballots are hand counted, and that verifies the system, but we aren't checking the other precincts. This sample audit, and they're usually known as risk limiting audits, and there's different types and a lot of policy implications to it. You take a random sample in the entire district, and it gives you a margin of confidence that you're certifying the correct winner. It actually isn't verifying the vote count. And the larger the margin, the fewer ballots you use, the tighter the margin, the more ballots you'll have to check. And you have to get usually special software to tell you which ballots need to be pulled from where to accomplish that type of audit.
All right, committee, we are out of time. So I will go ahead and ask you to look over the remaining items that we did not get to today, Senate Bill 11 and Senate Bill 35. You do have some testimony in there that should be distributed to you guys from neutrals and opponents. So I would encourage you to review that information. If you do have any questions or concerns for those individuals, please be sure to reach out to them. And as of right now, at this time, this Thursday's committee meeting is on call of the chairs. So I will let you know if that changes at all. Thank you, committee. We are adjourned.